B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, September 20th, 2018. Smears, lies, and deception are flowing freely in the corporate media these days. It's a case of too much coverage and too little news. And before we dive in, I just want to alert you that we've been doing more work here at the Secret Studio. Pedro was here last night, and we put down a fresh carpet in the studio. And tomorrow, I'm iffy for a podcast because we may be doing more renovations and upgrades. I'm just not sure yet. So play it by ear, and don't be shocked if I don't serve up a podcast on Friday the 21st. So I've actually seen each of the following claims that I'm about to debunk for you circulating on Facebook and being promoted in right-wing media. They relate to Brett Kavanaugh's accuser, Christine Blasey Ford. And it is amazing, given that she offered one interview, her letter to Senator Feinstein has been published, and it's been radio silence since then. A few comments from lawyers for Ford, but really that's about it. That's why I make the comment that there is too little news, and we have nearly wall-to-wall coverage of the Kavanaugh imbroglio. And one of the things that really offended me this morning on my drive to the Secret Studio, I was listening to Rush Limbaugh, and in the space of 5 minutes, he referred to Christine Blasey Ford as Christine Ballsy. Not once. Wasn't a slip of the tongue. This is something that he thinks is funny. And he thinks it sends this kind of edgy message that he thinks she's a slut and a liar. And the rationalizations that are flowing from Limbaugh and other right-wing hosts about what 17-year-olds do, boys or girls, trying to set up an equivalency that, there was as much drinking at Blasey Ford School as there was at Brett Kavanaugh's school. And there's just so much unconfirmed speculation and just widespread commentary that's based on absolutely nothing. So, the New York Times did us a favor, and they took a look at some of these false claims that are circulating on the web. For example, that Blasey's students left negative reviews at Rate My Professor. Well, it turns out that there are two Christine Fords. One teaches at California State University, Fullerton, and she's the one who's gotten the lousy reviews from students, not the Christine Ford from Palo Alto. Number two, I've heard many right-wing commentators spread the false information that Judge Kavanaugh's mother, who you may know was a judge herself, once ruled against Blasey's parents in a foreclosure case. And the description is that this was something very personal and that they were in her courtroom. I mean, the details are fictional. And the truth is that there was a foreclosure case that was withdrawn by the bank, and it was settled. And according to the actual facts, the Blasey family got to keep their home, and they never set foot in Martha Kavanaugh's courtroom. But if you just look online at court records, you'll see a case that Mrs. Kavanaugh presided over a foreclosure matter. And it doesn't take much to get the right-wing noise machine off and running, taking shreds of factual data and embellishing them with information that is just concocted. All right, here's another one. That Christine Blasey Ford made similar sexual accusations against Judge Neil Gorsuch during his nomination process last year. This is a claim that originated from a Twitter user named Josh Cornett, who appears to have a history of amplifying right-wing information. There is no known letter sent by Blasey regarding Justice Gorsuch or any other Supreme Court member. Next, that Blasey is a major Democratic donor with a long history of left-wing activism. You know how much money she donated to Democrats In the past, let me get this right, the past 4 years, less than $100. Then there's a picture being circulated that claims that it's Christine Blasey Ford holding a sign, "Not My President," at an anti-Trump rally. Well, the photo came from a stock picture website, and the woman in that picture is not identified. But the stock photo was taken at a march in New York in 2016, and from what we know, Blasey did attend a California Women's March in 2017. Then, here's the most far-fetched claim, all right? That Blasey has a brother who worked at a law firm with ties to the Russia investigation. So the details, when you actually look at them, are that her brother worked at the law firm Baker Hostetler. Critical fact, he left the firm in 2004. That's 14 years ago. And in 2016, Baker Hostetler hired Fusion GPS. They were actually one of the many parties who hired GPS to do opposition research. But to claim that Blasey's brother is somehow connected to that at a law firm he left 14 years ago, that's what is hyping the media right now and filling the airwaves and the news columns, and I really resent it. So, New York Times is reporting that evangelical leaders are pressing hard for the Senate to move forward with a hearing on Monday whether Blasey Ford shows up or not, regardless of whether there's been any further investigation of her claims. And it's because they don't really care about her claim of being a victim of attempted sexual assault, however that is characterized. They want Brett Kavanaugh on the court no matter what, because he's the guy who they think is going to overturn Roe versus Wade and ban abortion, at least at the state level, if not at the federal level in this country. And this is so astounding, because these are the Bible thumpers, the God Squad team that cover for Trump and his moral failings, his affairs with playmates and porn stars. Here's Franklin Graham. I hope the Senate is smarter than this, and they're not going to let this stop the process from moving forward and confirming this man. Ralph Reed? If Republicans were to fail to defend and confirm such an obviously and eminently qualified and decent nominee, then it'll be very difficult to motivate and energize faith-based and conservative voters in November. So he's essentially blackmailing the Republican leadership, saying that this key constituency group is going to, what? Vote for Democrats? Stay home? It's not clear that Ralph Reed or Franklin Graham or any of these pastors have that kind of pull over evangelical voters. So a lot of this is just so much hot air and posturing. And get this, Robert Jeffress, one of Trump's most vocal God Squad supporters from the First Baptist Dallas Church, he's pretty sharp guy politically. And he said he doesn't know who's telling the truth here, Kavanaugh or Blasey, but I can say with absolute certainty that the Democrats don't care who is telling the truth. Their only interest is in delaying and derailing this confirmation. He went on to say the White House is walking a tightrope. They cannot summarily dismiss these allegations and alienate GOP and independent female voters in the midterms. Neither can they abandon a nominee they and their base strongly support. Now, he's talking like a CNN politics guy. I thought he was trying to save souls. And here's an example of just how messy all of this is. There is a power couple at Yale Law School. One of them is the woman who wrote one of the Tiger Mom books, Amy Chua. And then there's her husband, Jed Rubenfeld. They're both considered very influential law professors at Yale. And word has surfaced that they told females who were considering applying for internships or clerkships with Judge Kavanaugh to exude a model-like image. Rubenfeld is quoted as saying to one woman student, "You should know that Judge Kavanaugh hires women with a certain look." And the student said, he didn't say what the look was, and I did not ask. And his wife, Amy Chua, told another law student that she should send her photographs so that Chua could tell her whether Kavanaugh would approve of her look. Now, on that surface, I don't really care. But this gets even messier because Amy Chua and Jed Rubenfeld's daughter either has been or currently is a clerk for Brett Kavanaugh. And the plot thickens. Chua has canceled her classes at Yale this semester. According to her office, she's been hospitalized, is not taking calls. Her husband said she's been ill and has a long period of recuperation ahead of her. We don't know the cause. And get this, The Guardian has learned that Rubenfeld is currently the subject of an internal investigation at Yale, focused on Rubenfeld's conduct, particularly with female law students. So we have dived into a cesspool, friends. And the deeper you go, the darker and stinkier it gets. In today's New York Times, a law professor from the University of Alabama, Ronald Krotosinski, argues the case for impeaching Brett Kavanaugh if he is confirmed by the Senate. Now, this, of course, requires that the Democrats take back control of the House and that they are able to get a majority to support articles of impeachment against Kavanaugh. And I would add that, and I'm not sure the law professor cites this in his commentary, but this would apply if Kavanaugh is rejected in the confirmation process. He could be impeached from his current post on the Court of Appeals, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. But it takes a lot to do that. And today, I'm releasing an in-depth interview with attorney Ron Fine, who makes the case for impeachment of Donald Trump. Fine co-authored the book, The Constitution Demands It, with John Bonifaz and Ben Clements. And here's an excerpt from my conversation with Ron Fine.
That's right, and I really want to hold both parties to account here and not just one. And I think that the reasons that people say we need to wait for the Mueller investigation to conclude really don't stand up to scrutiny. And I could walk through the critiques of that position one by one, but I think the key point to remember is that impeachment is different from a criminal proceeding. And impeachable offenses are not just crimes. Many of the impeachable offenses that we've listed, including the very first one, which is accepting foreign and domestic emoluments, are grounds for impeachment, even if they are not crimes. So using emoluments again as an example, the framers of the Constitution discussed this as an example of an impeachable offense, but it's not a crime, and Mueller is not looking into it. The Mueller investigation is not going to tell us anything more about the emoluments that the president is receiving. And when people conflate impeachment with a criminal proceeding, they miss out on a major purpose of impeachment, which is not to punish the president or the offender. It's to protect the republic.
I invite you to listen to the full interview with attorney Ron Fine about impeaching Trump. We cover a lot of the issues that they raise as possible articles of impeachment, and I agree with 7/8 of them, and we do have a polite disagreement related to Russiagate. I still find Ron Fine's arguments quite compelling, and I hope you'll listen to the interview and consider picking up the book and trying to advocate for impeachment in your circles and networks. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work with your subscriptions to the PBC podcast. People like, I mentioned those people yesterday, okay? Like Abby McMillan, Paul Tomaselli, Faith Peoples, and Aidan McAleer. They all kick in $5, $10, or $20 a month. How about you? I think it's your turn to help support this work. Come on over to peterbcollins.com. Find the menu tab, then click on Become a Subscriber. You'll land on the sign-up page, and it's easy to choose $5, $10, $20 a month. Our $50 annual subscription earns you our bonus gift. It's a CD by John Dist called American University, and I'll put it in the mail to you if you take out a new annual subscription and give me a mailing address in the continental U.S. As always, if you want to avoid PayPal, we can enable that. Just drop me a line at Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California 94915. Box 150660, San Rafael 94915. If there's only one thing you read today, click on the link in the show file for today's podcast and go over to thenation.com and read this piece by a Marine who served 5 years in Afghanistan, Lyle Jeremy Rubin. It's headlined, "The Forever War's Cheerleaders." Democrats, liberals, and progressives have become some of the biggest hawks in Washington, he says, and that needs to change. And this is a brilliant takedown of the way the Democrats have morphed from the party that opposed Bush's wars of choice to the party that was silent for Obama's shift to drones and covert action, and who now are as hawkish as can be, and it frightens this Marine, Lyle Jeremy Rubin. Rubin writes, "The problem with veterans is we keep remembering our wars when we're supposed to join everyone else in forgetting them. Today, I experience that gap most viscerally in politics, and liberal or progressive politics in particular, where celebrated commentators like Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell fail to cover America's ongoing wars and the role some of their favorite guests have played in launching and expanding them." I quote again, "The fact that these same Bush-era officials and pundits have now become heroes among partisan Democrats, and how John McCain has now become something of a liberal patron saint, drives me toward despair. It is not as if my sense of hopelessness emerged from a vacuum. By the time I was discharged from the Marines in 2011, Obama had already caved to the militarists on Libya and the drone war, was beginning to double down on an unaccountable surveillance state, waffling on the closure of Guantanamo. He would soon back Saudi Arabia's war of aggression in Yemen, a war many now consider genocidal. Then things began to change during the 2016 Democratic primary when the Clinton campaign made a conscious decision to align with the neocons in the lead-up to its bout with Trump. They danced with Robert Kagan, the Weekly Standard crowd, and others likely drawn to Clinton's willingness to ratchet up the air war against the Assad government in Syria. He goes on, "It is one thing to welcome investigations into Russia's involvement in the 2016 election and to push for electoral and anti-corruption reforms that might help prevent such interference in the future." Now, I don't support that premise, but I want you to hear what he links that to. Next, he says, "It is quite another to allow some of the world's most fervent jingoists to assume the vanguard of the anti-Trump opposition and to allow their politics to influence and define the language of the liberal and progressive left. There is something surreal about watching so many Democrats and liberal or progressive pundits adopt the ugliest rhetorical tics of the very post-9/11 chauvinism I once found myself immersed in, from seeing anyone or anything inconvenient to the presiding account as fifth columnist. Most of all, there is the ostensible disregard for the consequences of their newfound animus toward the national security state's latest boogeyman." There's more to this, and I hope that my quotes here have whetted your appetite. Please check it out, and I will see if I can track this gentleman down and get him to do an in-depth interview on the PBC podcast. Today in the New York Times, there is a recap called "The Plot to Subvert an Election." And while I couldn't manage to find the time to read all 27 pages, that's the printout version, I guess. In the print edition of the paper, it's many pages. Anyway, I consider this to be recycled yellow journalism, and I'm sorry to see that Scott Shane, who I haven't seen his byline for a while at the New York Times, and I thought maybe he was sitting out the Russiagate narrative. At any rate, he and Mark Mazzetti put this piece together, and I want to quote 3 paragraphs. "For many Americans, the Trump-Russia story, as it has been voluminously reported over the past 2 years, is a confusing tangle of unfamiliar names and cyber jargon, further obscured by the shout-fest of partisan politics. To many Americans, the intervention seemed to be a surprise attack, a stealth cyber-age Pearl Harbor carried out by an inexplicably sinister Russia. For Putin, however, it was long overdue payback, a justified response to years of provocations from the United States. And here comes the caveat." And while I don't know if it came from Mazzetti or Scott Shane, Scott Shane has been the one at the Times who has injected these caveats more often than other reporters. Quote, and there is a plausible case that Putin succeeded in delivering the presidency to his admirer Trump, though it cannot be proved or disproved. 27 pages. Knowing that the case they're making cannot be proved or disproved. We are in strange times. And get this, Bob Woodward, whose latest book, Fear, pulls back the curtain on the Trump White House, asked in a radio interview, did you, Bob Woodward, hear anything in your research and your interviews that sounded like espionage or collusion? I did not. And of course I looked for it hard. And so, there we are. But he went on to say, and they were talking about the former Trump defense lawyer, John Dowd. This is Woodward. We're going to see what Mueller has, and Dowd may be right. He has something that Dowd and the president don't know. A secret witness or somebody who's changed their testimony. As you know, that often happens, and that can break open or turn a case. So there's Bob Woodward, the guy who's done the deepest journalistic dive into the Trump White House recently. And he says, well, no, I looked for it and I didn't find it. John Pilger has a critical piece of mostly the British media at Consortium News today. It's a worthwhile read. He takes on the BBC and the Guardian, and he uses a group of truth tellers. They call themselves, what is it here? Media Lens. And it's two guys, a former teacher, David Edwards, and a former oceanographer named David Cromwell. And for the last few years, they have been fact-checking coverage by the BBC and other media outlets in Britain. And they've published a book now called Propaganda Blitz. And one of the things they expose is the smears of Julian Assange by The Guardian, which benefited from the leaks that he created from the whole Snowden case. They quote Luke Harding, who has ties to Christopher Steele, Orbis, and the Halyuk group in Britain, attacking Assange as a damaged personality, calling him callous. They cite a case where Harding was standing outside the Embassy of Ecuador in London with cops, gloating on his blog that Scotland Yard may get the last laugh. And Guardian columnist Suzanne Moore wrote, I bet Assange is stuffing himself full of flattened guinea pigs. He really is the most massive turd. Well, as you know, I don't believe we need to love or feel warm and fuzzy about Julian Assange to support the work he's done and his right to be a free man. And I think that Pilger does a good job of exposing media bias. Likewise, FAIR has a new report out analyzing NPR's Morning Edition. And if you listen to that show, I don't very often, you probably have noted that they bring on experts from Washington think tanks, more often from the conservative side than from liberal or progressive. And so a study by Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting showed that on NPR, the think tank guests, 35% are right of center, 44% are center, and 19% are described as left of center, and only 8% of that number is labeled progressive. And their favorite right-wing guest is Jonah Goldberg from the American Enterprise Institute. Also, with thanks to Carl Howard for the tip, World Socialist website is reporting that Facebook has expanded its fact-checking to fight so-called fake news beyond the articles that are posted and is now looking at videos and photographs. They've also expanded their pool of entities that help them do this so-called fact-checking, and they got caught last week when they suppressed a story from Think Progress about Brett Kavanaugh because somebody from the Weekly Standard claimed it was false, and it certainly was not. So now Guy Rosen, who is the VP of Product Management at Facebook, we're fact-checking photos and videos in addition to links. We've started in France, and it has now been expanded worldwide. So that's a very chilling issue, and we know that the fact-checkers find more fault with left views than they do with conservatives. The summit is wrapped up between Moon and Kim, South Korea and North Korea, respectively. We're told that Kim has promised to allow external inspectors into his country to verify that a missile test and launch site has been dismantled. He wants corresponding steps from the United States, and there may be the possibility of a meeting next week between Trump and Kim during the UN General Assembly. Trump is making Republicans nervous by tweeting attacks on the spending bill, suggesting that he might veto it and lead to a government shutdown. He tweeted today, "I want to know where's the money for border security and the wall," all caps, in this ridiculous spending bill, and where will it come from after the midterms? Republicans must finally get tough. Well, I guess he doesn't have a way to pressure Mexico to pay for that wall. On the big screen this weekend, the latest from Michael Moore. It's called Fahrenheit 11/9. And the advance information includes he fills up a water truck with the same kind of tainted water that the people of Flint were forced to drink and bathe in, and he waters the lawn of Michigan Governor Rick Snyder with it. Gosh, I can't wait for that. Moore says in the film that Trump has always committed his crimes in plain sight. He alludes to accounts challenging his business practices and highlighting his expressions of bigotry. And while Trump starred in The Apprentice, Michael Moore says nobody wrote into NBC to ask for the removal of an overt racist from its airwaves. So Michael Moore's kind of run out of appeal to me. The documentary or the film that he released just before the 2016 election, where he was selling Hillary Clinton to Bernie Sanders supporters, that was a really ugly sellout. And finally today, my friend Tom Campbell has floated a new idea. I've known Tom since he was a Republican member of Congress from Silicon Valley back in the early 1990s. I actually registered as a Republican one time so I could vote for Tom Campbell in the Senate primaries under our old laws here, our old rules. And Tom Campbell ran for the U.S. Senate in 2000, and he hired me to work on his campaign. His opponent was the conservative Democrat, Dianne Feinstein. And Campbell ran to her left on a number of issues. He had already announced his opposition to Bush tax cuts even before Bush got elected or, installed. So now Tom Campbell, who's a law professor at Chapman University in Southern California, wants to start a new party in California. And he says there's a way to do it without gathering 700,000 signatures. The state constitution allows 60,000 registered voters to go online or to their county registrar and switch their registration to a new party. And if they do that, he says this could happen with a budget of less than $100,000. There are 4.9 million voters like me who register no political preference. And he says that is a pejorative. He said a new party, even one with no ideological platform, would allow a candidate to run outside the current party structure, but without the scarlet letter of NPP. Well, Tom Campbell, to his credit, left the Republican Party when it nominated Donald Trump for president. And I'm glad to see he's looking for a third way here in California. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it far and wide. You'll find it on YouTube. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.